Some games fail because they're bad, while other games fail because they're broken. But then there are games like Sleeping Dogs. Games that come out, get strong reviews, build a cult following, age incredibly well, and then somehow still get buried in the giant graveyard of franchises that absolutely could have continued. Because Sleeping Dogs is not just another forgotten open world game. It's not just GTA in Hong Kong. It's not just one game your friend kept telling you about in 2012. Sleeping Dogs is one of the best games I've played. And honestly, it might be one of the biggest missed opportunities in modern gaming. Because when we talk about open world crime games, the conversation usually begins and ends with Grand Theft Auto. And I get it. GTA is a behemoth. It is the cultural black hole of the genre. Everyone gets pulled into its orbit. But Sleeping Dogs did something different. It didn't beat GTA by trying to be bigger than GTA. It didn't beat GTA by giving you a massive empty map with an incredulous amount of collectibles and a radio station that plays ironically funny fake ads every 6 seconds. It didn't compete with them on the satire front. Sleeping Dogs worked because it was incredibly focused and it had style. It had its own identity and it had a city that felt incredibly alive. And most importantly, it had one of the most satisfying combat systems ever put in an open world game. I'm serious. There are games that let you punch people. Sleeping Dogs lets you fold them like lawn chairs, slam them into a phone booth, counter 3 guys at once, vault over a table, kick someone into a fish tank, and then walk away like you're in the final act of a Hong Kong crime movie. It's incredible. I mean, we're only starting to see similar stuff now in things like 007 First Light, and that's what made Sleeping Dogs so special back in the day. Because open world games, especially around that time, treated hand-to-hand combat like an afterthought. You had guns, cars, you could create a lot of epic explosions, and if you get too close to an enemy, the game basically says, I don't know, just press a button and hope for the best. Sleeping Dogs said no. Sleeping Dogs made melee combat its core identity. The fighting was fast, readable, brutal, and incredibly satisfying. It had that Arkham-like style and rhythm where you're reading the enemy movements, countering attacks, chaining hits, and managing space. But it also had its own flavor. It was messier, dirty, more grounded, less superhero, and more of a street fight. It had that grimy feeling to it. You were Batman floating between enemies. You were Wei Shen, an undercover cop who was also a martial artist. A man who looked like he had been carrying pain in his chest for years, and every punch felt crunchy and it hit hard. The environmental takedowns were the thing everyone remembers, and for good reason. The game turned the world itself into a weapon. Walls, fans, dumpsters, car doors, neon signs, market stalls. The city was not just scenery, it was part of the gameplay. That one design decision did so much. It made every fight feel different. It made positioning in fights matter and made the environment feel incredibly interactive. It made you feel like you were starring in some kind of action film that had Jackie Chan in it. And then the game layered progression on top of that in a way that actually fit the story. Because Wei Shen is living 2 lives. On one side, he is a police officer. On the other side, he's climbing the ranks of a crime family. And the game reflects that mechanically. You gain police XP by being precise, controlled, and professional, but you also gain Triad XP by being aggressive, stylish, and violent. It is a very simple idea, but it works because it reinforces the entire identity crisis at the heart of the story. Wei is not just pretending to be someone else, he is becoming someone else, and the lines get blurred over time. And the game keeps asking the same question over and over again. How much of this is really undercover work, and how much of this is who Wei actually is? That is why Sleeping Dogs hits harder than most people remember, because yes, the gameplay is great, the combat is amazing, driving around Hong Kong at night with neon lights reflecting off the roads still feels and looks incredible. But the reason people still talk about this game over a decade later is because there is a real emotional core underneath it all. The story is about loyalty, identity, family, corruption, and the emotional cost of living a lie for way too long. Wei Shen is not a blank slate protagonist. He is not just a guy with a gun and a minimap. He has history in Hong Kong. He has scars there that haven't fully healed. He has old friends, guilt, and unresolved trauma. When he infiltrates the Triad, he's not entering a world he knows nothing about. He's returning to a world that already had its hooks in him. And that makes the undercover angle so much more interesting. Because the game is not just asking, will Wei get caught? It is asking, does Wei even want to leave? That is where Sleeping Dogs separates itself from the generic crime game template. Because in a weaker version of this game, Wei is just a clean-cut cop surrounded by criminals. But in Sleeping Dogs, the criminals are often the people who show him warmth, loyalty, and brotherhood. Meanwhile, the institutions that are supposed to represent order are full of manipulation, compromise, and moral rot. The whole game lives in this gray area, and that is where a good undercover story should live. It should feel uncomfortable and messy. It should feel like the longer the mission goes on, the harder it is to tell where the performance ends. And Sleeping Dogs understood that. It understood the fantasy of being an undercover cop, but it also understood the tragedy of it. You are betraying a man who has to betray people who trust him. And some of those people deserve it, but a lot of them don't. And that's the thing. The game has all the surface level appeal of an action movie, but the reason it stays with you is because underneath the bone-crunching combat and street races and shootouts, there's this melancholy running through the whole thing. Wei Shen wins fights, but he does not really win peace. And I love that. I love when games understand that being cool and being sad are not opposites. Sometimes the coolest characters are cool because they're tragic. That is basically the entire history of crime fiction. Sleeping Dogs feels like it was made by people who loved Hong Kong action cinema. John Woo, Internal Affairs, Police Story, those kinds of stories where loyalty and violence and brotherhood all blur together under neon lights. And it's not subtle about its inspirations, and it doesn't need to be either. The game has enough personality to become its own thing. Hong Kong is the real magic trick here. Not because it is the biggest open world ever made, it's not. And not because every building has an interior, it doesn't. But because it has atmosphere and density and texture, night markets, rain, apartment buildings, docks, karaoke bars, temples, traffic, little side alleys, food vendors, the way the city feels crowded without feeling bloated. Sleeping Dogs understood something that a lot of open world games still forget. A smaller world with a strong identity is better than a massive world with nothing to say. I would rather have a city I remember than a continent I forgot. Hong Kong in Sleeping Dogs is memorable. It's not perfect and it has a lot of limitations. There are parts of the city that feel incredibly gamey. The side content is very repetitive. The shooting is solid but not amazing. Driving is fun, but it's not perfect either. And yes, by modern standards, some of the mission design is very outdated. But the game works because all the pieces were pointed in the same direction. Everything fed the fantasy. That's why Sleeping Dogs still feels better than many newer open world games with bigger budgets and more things to do. Because Sleeping Dogs knew exactly what it wanted to be. It wanted to be a stylish, brutal, emotional Hong Kong crime thriller that you can play. And it nailed that. So the obvious question is, what happened? How does a game this good not get a sequel? How do you make one of the most beloved cult classics of its generation and then just disappear? Well, the answer is painful. Because Sleeping Dogs was basically fighting for its life before it was even called Sleeping Dogs. This game had one of the weirdest development journeys imaginable. It started as an original open world game set in Hong Kong from United Front Games. Then Activision got involved and turned it into True Crime Hong Kong, a reboot of the old True Crime series. And then Activision cancelled it, which in hindsight is insane, because the game was very far along. The idea was there, the city was there, the bones of something special were there. But Activision looked at it and basically said, this is not going to compete at the level we need. That is always the brutal part of the games industry. A game does not need to be good. It needs to be good enough to justify the money behind it. It needs to fit a portfolio. It needs to satisfy projections. It needs to survive comparison to the biggest games out there. And for an open world game, that means you're not just competing with other games, you're competing with Grand Theft Auto. And that is a death sentence for a lot of projects. Because publishers look at Grand Theft Auto and they don't just see a successful game, they see a standard that almost nobody can realistically meet. So Activision canceled True Crime Hong Kong, and that should have been the end. But then Square Enix came in, picked up the publishing rights, and United Front Games got a second chance. That is the miracle story of Sleeping Dogs. It is a game that was already dead once, and it escaped the grave. It got renamed, got polished, and then released. And somehow, after all of that, it was actually exceptional. That almost never happens. Usually when you hear a game was canceled, revived, renamed, reworked, and pushed through multiple publishers, you expect disaster like Duke Nukem Forever. You expect something incredibly compromised. You expect a game where you can feel the seams ripping apart. But Sleeping Dogs actually came out and said, no, we're not just surviving, we're thriving too. And critics responded. Players who found it loved it. The game built a reputation. But here is where the tragedy begins. It simply didn't sell enough. or more accurately, it didn't sell enough for Square Enix. And that distinction matters, because Sleeping Dogs sold millions. But Square Enix had expectations, and Sleeping Dogs missed them. That is the nightmare sentence for any game. Failed to meet expectations. Those 4 words have killed more franchises than bad reviews ever could. And in 2013, Square Enix was not just looking at Sleeping Dogs in isolation, they were looking at a bigger problem. Tomb Raider, Hitman Absolution, and Sleeping Dogs all reviewed reasonably well, all had major budgets behind them, and all missed their internal targets. So from Square Enix's point of view, the issue was not, do people like Sleeping Dogs? The issue was, can Sleeping Dogs become a giant enough franchise to justify another huge investment? And the answer they landed at was unfortunately no, or at least not yet. And that is so frustrating, because this is where the modern AAA game becomes a creative meat grinder. A good game is not enough. A beloved game is not enough. A critically successful game is not enough. If the spreadsheet doesn't smile back, the franchise dies. And Sleeping Dogs was the exact kind of game that gets crushed by that system. It was too expensive to be treated like a small little experiment, but not massive enough to be treated like a guaranteed blockbuster. It was in the middle, and the middle class of the games industry has been dying for years. That is the real villain of Sleeping Dogs' story. Not critics, not players, not even one specific executive. The villain is a business model that says a game can be loved, respected, and still not be worth continuing. Because when open world games get expensive enough, they stop being creative bets and start becoming corporate roulette. You're not asking, can we make something great? You're asking, can this become one of the biggest franchises ever? And most games simply can't. Most games shouldn't have to. Sleeping Dogs doesn't need to be GTA or sell like it. It just needed to be Sleeping Dogs, because the industry did not really have enough space for that. And then came the idea of a sequel, or at least the ghost of one. Sleeping Dogs 2 was real in the sense that United Front Games had ideas, documents, and ambitions for it. And the ideas sounded wild. Wei Shen returning, a new partner, a bigger setting in China's Pearl River megacity, branching story elements, a reputation system, co-op ideas, companion app ideas, a more connected world. It sounded like United Front Games wanted to take everything that worked about the first game and expand it to something much more ambitious. And part of me hears that and thinks, that could have been incredible. But another part of me hears that and thinks, oh no. Sleeping Dogs worked because it was so focused. So when I hear about a sequel pitch with multiple protagonists, bigger systems, companion apps, co-op, dynamic online elements, and a much larger scope, I understand why a publisher would hesitate. That does not mean I agree with the decision, but I understand the fear, because this was in the early 2010s. Everybody was chasing online features, was looking at second screen apps. Everybody wanted games to be bigger, more connected, more monetizable, more expandable. And then Sleeping Dogs seems like it got caught between 2 possible futures. One future was the obvious one: make a better, sharper, more polished single-player sequel, give us Wei Shen a new story, improve the combat, deepen the undercover systems, expand Hong Kong or move to another dense Asian city. Let the franchise grow naturally. That is a sequel people wanted. But the other future was the industry future. Online, free-to-play, connected systems, recurring revenues, multiplayer infrastructure. That is the future publishers were obsessed with. And unfortunately, Sleeping Dogs got pulled towards the second path. Instead of Sleeping Dogs 2, we got Triad Wars. And I don't want to be cruel to Triad Wars, because I am sure some talented people worked on it, but come on, that's not what the people wanted. The people wanted a Sleeping Dogs sequel. They wanted a story, they wanted martial arts combat, they wanted another stylish crime thriller, and instead the franchise became a free-to-play online spin-off. That's not automatically bad in theory, but it misunderstood the core appeal of Sleeping Dogs. People did not fall in love with Sleeping Dogs because they wanted a live service crime sandbox. They fell in love with it because it felt authored. It had a protagonist, good pacing, drama, emotional stakes. It had 3 acts, a beginning, middle, and end. Taking that and turning it into an online multiplayer project felt like removing the soul and keeping the leather jacket. And Triad Wars never really got off the ground. It went into beta, fans were confused, the response was muted, and then it was shut down. And then United Front Games closed. And once the studio was gone, Sleeping Dogs was not just missing a sequel, it was missing its home. That is the part of the story that makes it so incredibly depressing. Because sometimes a franchise disappears, but the studio is still around, there's still a team, there's still some institutional memory of it, there's still some people who understand why the first game worked, so you might get spiritual successors. But with Sleeping Dogs, because the developers shut down, the people scattered, the industry moved on. The IP stayed with Square Enix, sitting there like a neon sign in an abandoned street, but it's quite dead today. And that is why Sleeping Dogs feels so weird to talk about, because the game is not forgotten in the normal sense. People remember it and love it. Every few months, some clip goes around of the combat. Everyone says, wait, why didn't this get a sequel? And the answer is always the same, because the games industry is very good at killing good things before they become great things. Sleeping Dogs could have been the first chapter in an incredible franchise. It should have been Square Enix's open world crime series. It was never a GTA killer. Every time something is called a GTA killer, it basically comes with a curse attached. Sleeping Dogs did not need to kill GTA. It needed to coexist with it. It needed to be stylish. It needed to be the stylish martial arts crime thriller, while GTA was the massive satirical crime sandbox. There was room for both, and there still is room for both. Because the truth is, GTA is so big now that it barely even scratches the same itch anymore. GTA is an event, a platform, a cultural meteor. Sleeping Dogs was something smaller and sharper. A focused, single-player crime story with incredible hand-to-hand combat in a city that actually felt different. Don't get me wrong, I still think GTA 6 is gonna be incredible, but Sleeping Dogs was valuable. It was rare, and honestly, in 2026, it might even be more valuable than it was in 2012, because look at where games are now. People are tired of loaded open-world games. They are tired of maps that look like someone spilled icons on a screen. They're tired of live service pivots and corporate greed that nobody asked for. Sleeping Dogs was never a forever 10-year game, and that is why it was great. It ended, left an impression. It did not beg you to log on every day. It gave you a story, a city, a combat system, and a lot of incredible memories. And then it trusted you to remember it, and people did. That is the ironic and tragic part. Sleeping Dogs failed to become a massive franchise, but it succeeded in becoming something much harder. It became beloved. Quietly, slowly, over time, it became one of those games that people recommend with genuine excitement because it still feels like a secret. Even though it sold millions, got a remaster, even though it has been talked about for over a decade, it still feels like something you discover in the back corner of a game store. Like a lost classic. Like a game that slipped through a crack in the industry and came out better than it had any right to be. And I think that's why it hurts so much, because Sleeping Dogs didn't fail creatively. It failed commercially, by the specific standards of a publisher going through a very rough period. It failed because expectations were too high. It failed because open world games were too expensive. It failed because the sequel was maybe too ambitious. It failed because the industry was moving towards online monetization. It failed because the studio could not survive. But the game itself was exceptional, and it still is exceptional. That is why this is not just a what happened story. This is also a what could have been story. What could Sleeping Dogs 2 have looked like with a proper budget and a clear vision? What if Square Enix had treated it like a franchise that needed time to grow instead of a product that needed to immediately hit a target? What if United Front Games had been allowed to make the obvious sequel instead of chasing the live service future? What if Wei Shen became one of gaming's greatest crime protagonists? What if Sleeping Dogs became a series that explored different cities, different criminal worlds, different undercover stories, Hong Kong, Macau, Shanghai? The potential was ridiculous, and instead we only got one game, one great game, Sleeping Dogs. A game that should not have worked, but did regardless. A game that deserved so much more. So if you've never played it, play it. Not because it's perfect, it's not. Not because it is bigger than modern open world games. It's not. Play it because it has something that a lot of modern games are missing. A soul. A reason to exist beyond content. Sleeping Dogs is the kind of game people say they want more of. And the saddest part is, we had it. We had the blueprint, the franchise starter, the character, the city, the combat, the critical reception, the fan love. We had everything except for the sales number the corporate world wanted. And because of that, Sleeping Dogs went to sleep. Maybe forever. I really hope not, because if there's any justice in this industry, maybe someone at Square Enix is going to look at this IP and realize what they have. Not a failed franchise, not an open world game from 2012, but one of the best games an entire generation somehow missed, and one of the few dormant franchises that actually deserves to wake up. Because Sleeping Dogs was not just good, it was really special. And the fact that we never got a real sequel is insane to me. So yeah, what happened to Sleeping Dogs? It got caught between art and business, between critical success and corporate expectations, between the single player game people loved and the online future publishers wanted. And like a lot of great games, It didn't die because nobody cared. It died because not enough people cared at the exact right time, in the exact right way, with the exact right amount of money attached. And that might be the most gaming industry tragedy imaginable. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Did you play Sleeping Dogs? Do you think this game deserved a sequel? Because I do. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, everyone. I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.